Okay, welcome to the AA Star session. What we're going to be doing in this session is really practicing the AA Star skills, looking for knowledge in specific places, making sure, guys, that we absolutely understand the A Star, the A ideas of what should be in a response. We know exactly what the 6 mark, 8 mark looks like. We've mastered the technique, we understand the technique, we know what to look for, so we know what to put in our answer for the mocks or for the exams. Okay, so we're going to focus on obviously securing the knowledge, preparing for the marks, writing and developing our answers, but really important, understanding what we're looking for when we're looking at the questions. Because sometimes I think people lose the focus of that, they forget what they're looking for, but that's something we need to do. Alright, so we're going to start it with a 4 mark. Now I would like you to secure 4 marks in 3 minutes, so I'm going to put my stopwatch on. If it decides to work. Okay, so I put my stopwatch on, and what I'd like us to do now is literally secure 4 marks in 3 minutes. Have a look at this question. So the question says, it's my money, I can spend £100 on scratch cards if I like. It's a 4 mark questions, which means I want 2 reasons, agree, disagree, agree, doesn't really matter, but I want 2 reasons from a religious believer. Remember how to structure the sentence, remember what a 4 mark looks like, and remember, we don't need a quote. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video now, and I'd like you to give yourself 3 minutes. So pause the video, write the response, go. Pause the video. Okay, so if you're back, then I guess you've unpaused the video because you've done that. I guess you can look at the answer yourself and tell yourself, or and analyze or self-assess yourself and see whether you think you've scored the 4 marks. Just to tell you what you should have been putting in your response. Christians believe money should be used to help others, should be given to the poor, just like Jesus gave to the poor. Giving is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. £100 on gambling or scratch cards is a waste of money, and gambling is wrong in Islam and also in Christianity. So your answer should have basically said that both Christians and Muslims disagree. Obviously you're doing it agree, a Christian would agree or a Muslim would agree separate, but religious people would have disagreed for these conditions here. So that should have been in your answer. If you said they agree, that's inaccurate, and so you're going to have to go and look at the knowledge. It's a subject knowledge again. When we go through this session, if you find that actually you're getting the response wrong, then actually it means we need to go and secure the knowledge, because the knowledge is not secure. So please keep that in mind. If you don't know, it means the knowledge is not secure. If you do know, then we need to be able to master that 4 mark, that 6 mark, and the 8 mark. But today's session is more focused on the 6 and the 8. Just to remind you what the structure looks like, so this is exactly how we should write. I mean, we can write in lots of different ways, but to make sure we actually include everything we should, this is what, if you look at the response model here on the right, okay, so the response model for a 4 mark, for a Christian, that talks about influence, the structure for a agree, disagree question, the structure for a 6 mark, and then the structure for an 8 mark. Following this criteria is really important because it helps you structure how to lay out your response. Rather than just writing anything in any order, actually if you keep it concise and in order and you memorize that order, it becomes second nature when you're writing it down. So keep that in mind as we go through. We want to stick to the criteria because that helps us structure our responses better. Okay, so let's have a look at this first one. This is a question. Nothing can come from nothing. It's a scientific fact. This proves that God created the universe because only God has that kind of power. Do you agree? So this is coming from our looking for meaning topic. Have a look at this 8 mark. I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, assess the response, give it a mark out of 8, and then tell me what's missing and how would you finish it off. So pause the video now and do that now. Okay, so if you're back, it means you've done that. So let's look at the answer. I do not agree with the statement because it's not true. A Christian kind of would agree because they believe stuff like this and that God is a real person. In the Bible, it says Jesus died on the cross, and so this proves the question. A Muslim believer would say that the statement is also true because they believe they can go and make the world, and therefore, why would they not believe in this? An alternative view to this is that God didn't make the world because he is not real. No one has ever seen him, so how can he be real? In conclusion, I think that the statement is correct, as nothing can come from nothing, and so it's more likely that someone, possibly God, made the world, as it couldn't have come from himself. So this is a real answer by a student, and I've literally typed out what they've written, and so let's look at what they wrote. So I do not agree with the statement because it's not true. So they've given a point, but it's not developed, it's not supported. They haven't expanded on the reasons why, so we've lost marks there straight away. A Christian kind of would agree because they believe stuff like this and that God is a real person. I'm not sure if is that right. Do they believe God is a real person? Would they kind of agree? It's almost like, well, they're not sure. We should have an assertive opinion from a Christian, depending on which denomination you want to go for. The response must be assertive, okay? In the Bible it says Jesus died on the cross, and so this proves the question. Unfortunately, that doesn't prove the question, and so that's an error made. And nothing, we don't have quotes, we don't have more depth, it's quite basic. A Muslim believer would say that the statement is also true because they believe God can make the world, and therefore why would they not believe in this? Okay, so they've alluded to some point that yes, God made the world, and Muslims believe God made the world, but the conclusion doesn't fit in. It's not been expanded, it's not been analysed or explained to support that conclusion. And again, why would they believe in it? Well, because it's in the Holy Scriptures, but that hasn't been brought out. So again, just by going through those 2 points, I won't do the alternative. I'll let you, actually, why not? Let's have a look at the alternative. An alternative view to this is that God didn't make the world because he's not real. No one has ever seen him, so how can he be real? In conclusion. Okay, so again, that alternative it's an affirmative point, it's an assertive point. They've given a point, but again, there's not much detail and depth in this response. There's quite a lot missing. We have quotes missing, we have justifications missing, we have reasoning missing. And actually, there's a lot from this, so this wouldn't score a high mark because of all those different aspects that are missing. Remember, we need to have those quotes in there. We need to explain and refer to the quotes. We need to have religious teaching and what it would, how it would respond to that question. And our view on the alternative view must be affirmative. And again, it must be in detail. How can we give a response unless it's in detail? So let's move on, okay? Let's practice some model answers and let's look at what we are looking for. So let's look at this question. Explain from 2 religious traditions the religious views on responding to God. So I want you to pause the video in a moment. What would you give this out of 6? Is it a good response? What could we do to make it better? Pause the video now. Okay, so if you're back, it means you've paused the video. Now, this answer, if you look at it and if you gave it 6 out of 6, unfortunately, you shouldn't have. Main error is that it gives 2 Christian opinions. Now, if it had given 1 Roman Catholic opinion and 1 Protestant opinion, it would have been fine. But by giving just 1 Christian opinion, by just writing Christian in both at the beginning of both sentences, you actually lose around 2 to 3 marks because you're only giving it from 1 religious tradition. So we have to make sure we read the question carefully, give it from 2 religious traditions. The response itself is actually quite strong. It gives lots of depth as to why religious people pray. It links it to Jesus and how he prayed and how he encouraged people to pray. Yes, it doesn't have a religious reference, but the detail in the answer is good enough to make sure it's secure, the knowledge inside. And so that's actually really, really strong. And so that's really, really important right now. The second response again is good because it talks about going to church, and it talks about giving a sense of God being there, a sense of belonging. It gives the benefits of going to church, and it shows from that religious tradition how they respond to God. So again, the responses are strong, but you can't make that little mistake of missing out whether you're talking about a liberal Christian or a normal Christian. Now, if you don't know the difference between those denominations, or if you don't include it, then we put a Christian opinion, a Christian teaching and an Islamic teaching, as simple as that. But if you do know the difference between different traditions in Christianity, then you can include those traditions because they will be alright. But just to be on the safe side, we'll go for a Christian and a Muslim, so make sure you have the understanding from both perspectives. Okay, so have a look at this response. I want you to just take a moment out, practice this question. Religious believers have to believe in life after death. Now, you can either go for the B grade, A grade, or A star grade, but since this is an A star session, we're going to go for the A star grade. So what I would like you to do is create a perfect, absolutely perfect answer. I want you to use the criteria that I showed you at the start, the 8-mark structure. And I also want you to use these keywords. Now I've put some sentence starters here, and you don't have to use them, and ideally it's just there to prompt you, but we want to include the words fundamental, religious belief, crucifixion, resurrection, judgment, and evidence. Okay, because those are quite key words that need to be in a response that talks about life after death. So I'd like you to pause the video, and I'll give you 7 minutes. Really time yourself, take 7 minutes, see if you scored 8 out of 8. You can bring the answer to myself or give it to a friend to peer mark. Pause the video now. Okay, if you're back, it means you've responded to the question. And what I'd like you to think about is I'd like you to think about the answer that you wrote. Did you secure full marks? Did you get 8 out of 8? Did you do what you were supposed to do? Please bring it to myself and I will double check that for you. Let's see if you can actually secure those marks. Okay, so let's look at what a response would look like. Now, I've only given here a Christian and a Muslim response. And so I want you to think about it sort of being structured as a 6-mark rather than an 8-mark. So let's have a look at the answer. So religious believers have to believe in life after death. So what would you give this out of 6? Just take a minute, have a look at this response. Okay, so looking at this and thinking about this, would you give this out of 6? The answer is 0. Because although the answer is excellent, it has nothing to do with the question. Absolutely nothing to do with the question. And so again, you need to be going back and thinking, does my response, am I answering the question? This one says a Christian may respond through prayer. This is because prayer is seen as a personal essential communication with God. So it's the wrong answer. This is for a different question. So although the structure is right, the information's correct, actually it has nothing to do with what this question's asking, especially from a Christian view and a Muslim view in response to the actual question. Alright, another question, let's look at it. If the Bible says that God made the world in 6 days, then Christians must believe this. If this came up in a 4-mark question, this is what it should look like. It would be agree, disagree, or influence. But the response, I want you to look at the response. A Christian would believe this, or they would agree with the statement, because the Bible is seen as the Word of God. If Christians begin to doubt this, then it can be seen as a sin. So actually here, the response is not about whether or not God made the world in 6 days. It's about the authority behind what makes that assertion. And a lot of people made mistakes with this question because they started talking about, yes, God made the world in 6 days because the Bible says that he made the world in 6 days. But the question is saying, if the Bible says that God made the world in 6 days, then Christians must believe this. And actually, the first part and the last part of this question are the most important part. If the Bible, and then Christians must believe this. Well, we know that it's fundamental that Christians must believe everything that comes from the Bible. So this question is not really talking about the world being made in 6 days. So your answer shouldn't really contain anything about the world being made in 6 days as such, but it should question and assert the authority of the Bible and allowing Christians to believe what the Bible teaches. So actually the answer here is actually focused more on the authority of the Bible and why Christians would agree with that. So again, if we look at if this came up in a 6-mark, look how different it is to the 4-mark. I want you to just pause the video and identify the parts that's different. What information does that 6-mark have that the 4-mark doesn't have? And does it make it better? The detail and the quality of the answer, is it better? And if we look at the alternative view, so rather than writing the whole response again, I've just shown you an alternative view from that question. Is that answer good enough? Or look at the quality of the answer, I should say. That would be an absolutely strong alternative view. because it's an alternative view from either a liberal Christian, an atheist, or someone who's inclined scientifically and not religiously. And the focus here is on scientific inquiry and the strength and the security of scientific and empirical evidence about the world, rather than just faith and trust in religious teaching and doctrine. And so one thing I really want you to pick out from this is when you're looking at the quality of the 4, the 6, and the quality of the 8, you can straight away see that the way that the answers are articulated is totally different. And actually, if you're writing in this style, you will secure full marks, and you could possibly get 100% in the paper. But it is the quality of your answer that really, really matters. You cannot make simple points and just par them off. Your points have to be straightforward, they have to be clear, they have to be concise, and then you have to add depth, detail, evidence. In the 6 mark, you would do that and add a religious quote. And in the 8 mark, you would give a viewpoint that would be justified as fully and as well as possible, being as evaluative as possible. All right, let's have a look at a 4 mark that's written out like a 6 mark, and let's see if we think this is any good. So again, the question's a 4 mark question, but I've structured it so we can see it like a 6 mark response, because we know that a 6 mark response always says, explain from this religious tradition, the teaching on so and so. But I wanted us to actually have a look at if, it won't happen in the exam paper, but I wanted us to have a look at a 4 mark and see if we could structure and put the depth in there to make it look like a 6 mark. So pause the video and have a look at this response. Okay, so if we come back to this, we can see straight away that the quality of the answer is absolutely mind-blowingly strong. We've got religious teaching in there. We've got what it leads Christians to do, how it impacts them and their lives. We've got religious teaching and where it comes from, and then we've got how that affects people and how that affects Christians and what it compels them to do. A fantastic response there from both religions. And that's what you really want to include in your 4 or 6 answers and your religious opinions. You want to give an explanation, a straightforward explanation of the religious teaching. Then you want to give detail and depth to that religious teaching. And then to finish it off, you want to add in religious teaching and how it impacts people, what it causes them to do, how it affects their life. And that's how you really, really secure a 4 and a 6 brilliantly, especially a 6. Because we want to hear the religious teaching, and like I've said to you before, the quote is not the explanation. An explanation has to come before the quote, but the quote is not the explanation. We can explain and get lots of information from a quote, but the quote should be used to support the explanation given. The explanation that's in detail, in depth, the quote should be there to support it, and the quote is not the explanation. So, let's just have a look at this 8 mark. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video here, and I want you to have a go. Focus on the question, focus on what it's asking. Religious people must fight injustice wherever and whenever they see it. Now, this kind of fighting, is it war fighting? Or protesting fighting, or sort of speaking out for the oppressed fighting? Because it's injustice we're talking about. So don't misconstrue this and write about war, because it's not necessarily talking about war, it's talking about fighting injustice. So pause the video, and I want you to write this response. Okay, so if you're back, I'm assuming you've done that. Again, you can give it to someone next to you and see if you secured 4 out of 4. Again, bring it to myself, let me have a look at it, and let me sort of assess it, and let me see whether or not you would have secured 4 marks. But remember, what you should have talked about here is how religious teaching supports religious people, how they use it, how it's structured, how they use it, fighting injustice through protesting, or through giving to the poor, or through creating charities to help people who are oppressed, and in whatever form they see it. You might argue, in your opinion or the alternative, not just religious people should do it, but everybody should do it, not just religious people, but actually religious people are compelled to do it because of the religious teaching, and that would come through in your Christian and your Muslim response. Okay. So, another go at an 8 mark. Giving all your money to charity doesn't help anybody. I want you to pause your video and write this, and I'll talk you through what the answer could have looked like. It's really important that you actually emphasize on that part where it says all, not some. The question says giving all your money to charity doesn't help anybody. And I want you to think about the response. Think about the question. Focus on the question. Does giving all your money to charity, does it help somebody? Does it help nobody? Does it help you? So think about that response. I want you to pause your answer. I want you to pause the video now. Okay, so if you're back, it means you've written that structure, you've written that answer. So giving all your money to charity doesn't help anybody. Let's start with your opinion. Well, my opinion would be giving all your money to charity does help somebody. It helps the person who I've given all my money to, but it doesn't necessarily help myself. Okay, so if I give all my money to a charity, it does help someone. It might not help them in the best way, it might not help them in the fullest way, but it does help them. And I would expand on that and talk about how it might help them, how it would go to doing specific things in specific places with specific people. A Christian might agree, some Christians would agree that actually giving your money to charity doesn't help anybody because it puts you at a loss, but it does help somebody again. It helps the people who the money goes to. I would talk about how Jesus compels us to give, but he doesn't maybe compel us to give to the point where we have nothing and we're ourselves impoverished. And again, coming through in Islam, the same thing, that actually God doesn't want us to hold on to our money. He doesn't want us to cling on to our money. He does want us to give, but it would be foolish for us to give everything and have nothing left for ourselves. And last but not least, there's an alternative. Giving all your money to charity doesn't help somebody. Well, yeah, it might help actually you as well. So once you've given all your money, it helps whoever you've given it to, but it might help you because you might decide that money is negative in your life and you want to stay away from it, or it's corrupting. And so by giving money to charity, it does help someone and it does help yourself. It doesn't leave anybody at loss, and actually it's a benefit to every single person, including yourself. Because, I don't know, you're cleansing or you're purifying. In Islam, there's the idea of purification, and the idea that actually when you give money away, it helps you to stop being greedy and clinging onto it. And so it's a form of purification.